My problems have changed as my career has grown. My problems used to be at the very beginning just being able to wake up in time to open up and cook the grits and cook the bacon and hoping customers walk in the door. Whereas my problems now are much, much different. Last time I counted, we have something like 188 employees across the state. So your role changes and kind of shifts and morphs as the business continues to grow. But that's part of the exciting part of it too. You're always learning something different, and there's always multiple hats to wear, that's for sure. And if you're not good at something, then you consider bringing somebody on specifically for handling that kind of stuff.
From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors. All the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode, I speak with Brad Buckenheimer, co-founder and CEO of Canopy Road Cafe. The Tampa native got his first taste of the hospitality industry as a country club cabana boy at age 14 and says he has always had a job. His path to entrepreneurship, which includes owning 13 Canopy Road locations and being a partner in several other concepts, including the popular Lemon Thyme in Midtown, has had some unexpected twists. An internship in Los Angeles led to touring as a fill-in drummer for a popular band. Brad was a bartender, corporate trainer for a major restaurant chain, and developed leadership skills that would unknowingly come in handy later in life. But it was a call from his former FSU roommate and best friend saying that he had just purchased Jenny's Lunchbox, a small restaurant where they both worked in college, that would put his future in motion. And while Brad is proud of all that he has accomplished, he acknowledges that none of it would have been possible without the love and support of many others, most importantly, his parents and wife, Allison. We begin our conversation talking about family life in Tampa.
I loved it. My family and I are very close. My dad is a dentist, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. She just recently retired, actually. The pandemic kind of called her there. She said she'd had enough and didn't really like the way that things were developing post-pandemic when it came to teaching and stuff like that. So she decided to retire, and she spent a good 30 years doing it. So it was definitely time for her. My father actually recently retired as well. So now they're both retirees. My dad is heavily involved in the political side of dentistry. So definitely I get most of my gumption and my work ethic from him. They're both still to this day very inspiring to me. I have a younger brother who is also in the restaurant industry down in Tampa as well. Growing up, I did real well in school, played a lot of sports, played tennis growing up. I noticed a lot of your guests are also musicians, which I thought was kind of inspiring too, because I played drums since I was 10 years old.
Okay.
So grew up playing drums, played in a bunch of different bands that I started in high school, played in the marching band, was drum captain junior and senior year. But by the time I got to college, I realized that I wanted to play drums more for fun, and I liked drum set more. I didn't want to have any sort of like career in the like marching or anything else like that. I wanted to have more of a college experience. So ended up coming to FSU, and then just had my undergraduate here. I started playing set when I was 10 years old, so there's just something about it that was it was gravitational for me. I was lucky that my parents really embraced it because
They have to.
They have to. Well, especially for drums, because they are one of the loudest instruments, that's for sure. So my mom would let us play in our garage. So me and a couple of friends, we would set up in the garage. It's very much like any sort of like teen movie where you set up. We would have kids over, and we would play little shows for them and stuff like that.
That's awesome. What kind of music was it?
Definitely punk rock, mostly pop punk and stuff like that. And what that kind of led to my post-college career job, which we can get into whenever.
Yeah, no, I saw that you had were touring and playing professionally. So yeah, I'm anxious to get into that. So like what bands inspired you? What was your favorite music at that when you were a kid?
Definitely like Green Day, Offspring, just a lot of that 90s pop punk, Goldfinger, just No Effects, a bunch of like just pop punk bands. Definitely more of the aggressive style, much to the chagrin of my mother. But I liked pop music too. I always loved Billy Joel. I love the classics, Creedence Clearwater Revival, stuff like that. So we were a very musical household. My parents are both singers and they sang for their church. They did chamber crowd music. I actually got to go to Germany my senior year of high school because they flew, or our church flew over everybody and their families to perform at Rhein-Main Air Force Base in Frankfurt. So they did like a little Air Force tour where they would go around and sing for the military people. So
that's awesome.
It was a fun experience, but there's always music going on in the house. My dad introduced me to like Pink Floyd and the band and all sorts of bands.
Yeah.
So it was fun growing up. Music's been a big part of my life and still is to this day.
That's awesome. It brings a lot of joy, and it's an easy thing to bring a family together when you can share that.
It certainly is. Yeah. I tried my hand at piano just to get into more percussion instruments, and my brother's actually a much better piano player than I am, but yeah, I always gravitated towards the drums. I'm naturally very ambidextrous, so that definitely helped.
It does help,
and just sort of had a knack for it. It kind of came naturally, and it was one of those things where growing up, it was one of the first things where I kind of what it feels like to actually be good at something naturally, kind of like how eventually when I grew into going into the restaurant industry, that kind of was another feeling where I was like, this all comes so very natural to me.
Right.
So it was like the first time that I got to experience something where I didn't feel like it was like work or trying. I kind of slipped in there, and I would get compliments all the time, like, "Oh wow, you're really good at drums," and I was just like, "Thank you," but it just comes so naturally to me. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's and I had a fun career with it post college, and it's very challenging to be a professional musician.
Well, let's talk about that. What did you do after college when you finished your degree? And we'll talk about your time at FSU, but what did you do in music? Did you have a band and you toured, or kind of what was going on?
So what happened was I was in a band when I was in college, and then when I graduated,
you played local bars and
correct,
stuff?
Yeah. I went on small tours around Florida and stuff like that. But when I graduated, I ended up getting an internship. I graduated from the College of Human Sciences with a merchandising degree, and you have to do an internship. And I kind of went to the professor at the time who was in charge of internships, and I was like, I got this internship at this record label out in Los Angeles, and it's not a typical internship that most people would get. A lot of people would go get internships for other like major retailers like Target and Best Buy and Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah.
I still have friends to this day who are still working for those companies and are very high up in those positions. So it was heavily recruited. But I was like, it's kind of outside the box, and I'm very lucky that they let me have the opportunity to go out there. So my dad helped me move out to Los Angeles. I was 21 maybe. And then I worked for a subsidiary record label of MCA Records that was signing up-and-coming bands, Newfound Glory, a couple other ones that were really big at the time. So I worked in the A&R department, so worked underneath people that were checking out new bands, a lot of times judging up-and-coming talent, but people would send demos in and stuff like that, so you would check out all the new bands. I mean, they were constantly getting demos like by bands trying to get signed and stuff, but when bands were coming into town, like us and all the other interns and some people from the record label would go to like the Whiskey or the Troubadour, and they would go check out these bands that weren't signed, and so to kind of evaluate them on their performance and stuff like that. So it was very exciting, obviously, as a young man living in Los Angeles.
Sounds pretty awesome.
It was great. So at the time, there was a band that they had signed onto the record label that lost their drummer. Somebody from the record label came to me and they're like, "Hey, you play drums, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I play drums." And they're like, "Would you sit in on a session with these guys just to kind of see if you vibe?" And the band was called Halifax, and I was like, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." And they were already booked for like Warped Tour and booked for some other tours and stuff like that. So it ended up we got along, and I played through a lot of their set, and was already familiar with some of their songs and stuff. So I ended up joining them, rocking a couple tours with them up and down the West Coast, played some shows here and there for about a year, and then it got to the point where I kind of felt like a hired gun, kind of like a mercenary. I wasn't in on all the inside jokes that they were in when they had first started the band and stuff like that, and it kind of felt a little odd. And also at the time, I started to get a little bit homesick. While I was working at the record label, I would moonlight by bartending at a high-end Mexican restaurant in like Topanga Canyon. So I was always still continuing to work in hospitality while I was doing my day job and stuff like that. So, but it was not cheap to make it as a young man out there, no matter how much I worked. So
I'm sure.
I eventually ended up moving back to Tampa.
So what was the lifestyle like? Was it like the movies? Was it crazy and touring nuts? All this?
It's it's a lot of van life. It's driving around in a 15-passenger van with a trailer, and a lot of sleeping at gas stations and rest stops, and you try to limit your nighttime drives and stuff like that. But it's definitely not cut out for the weak-willed, that's for sure. So luckily, if you're on a label, they tend to give you a per diem so you don't starve to death. But it's better to do it with an established band than an up-and-coming band, because I've done both. So as an up-and-coming band, it's a lot like starting a restaurant, actually, to be honest with you. You start off and nobody really knows you. Nobody really, cares. You're having to impress people to the best of your ability.
Right.
And so when you're joining an established band that already has a fan base and there's people coming to the shows, you're able to get, money off shows that's kind of set in stone and stuff like that because of contracts. It definitely makes your life a lot easier than when you're coming up and you're having to beg the promoter for more money and making sure that you can play a certain set at a certain time and stuff like that. So, but it's fun. I definitely have a lot of good times and good memories from that time in my life.
Yeah, I bet it sounds like an incredible experience in being the right age to be able to take advantage of something like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's actually good you said that, because the one thing I didn't mention was that I got to see different parts of the country at a young age. So I was able to, between touring and all the bands that I've been in, I was able to see, I think been in about 40 of the 50 states. So I was able, a lot of people, there's people that haven't even been outside Tallahassee, let alone been to, as many states as I was able to go to. So, and that, that's kind of on the road too, is where I kind of fell in love with restaurants, in particular diners, because a lot of times you get out of a show late and there's nothing open except for like Waffle House or a local diner where you can go in at like 1 a.m. and get pancakes and feed yourself. And so it definitely was enamored with that as we were touring and stuff.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about that transition. So you're done with the rock and roll life at that point, and then you move back to Tampa, and then what happens next? So
again, restaurant industry has always been in my back pocket. It was always something. I start in high school. My first job was at like 14. I was a cabana boy at a country club that my family was a member of, and then I worked at a smoothie place and a bagel place. So I did well in school, but I always had a job. It was something that I had asked my parents early on if I could be allowed to have a job, because I liked having walking around money. I was very industrious as opposed to a lot of my other friends. Like I liked having that part of my regiment, like getting out of school and going to work, or having my weekends to where I could work. It was always just part of me, But when, again, living out in Los Angeles, and moonlighting as a bartender, it had always kind of been in the background. I had always done hospitality because I kind of had a knack for it. So when I moved back to Tampa, I had a friend who was working at Chili's, and it was the one next to Raymond James Stadium where the Bucks play.
Yeah.
Very high volume store. They had mentioned that they were looking for some bar people, and so I ended up getting a job with them. So great money. Again, I'm about 23 at the time, something like that. So it was at a high volume store. Ended up doing really well, And then at the time, Brinker International, who's the parent company of Chili's, they had just acquired a brand called Macaroni Grill, which I'm sure you remember.
Sure.
At the time, Macaroni Grill, when they first came into the scene, the menu was still written in Italian. It was very like up and coming at the time. There was really no competitor for Carrabba's at the time, and they definitely entered the space and would go toe to toe with them. So they asked if I wanted to make a transition because they were building a new Macaroni Grill on the north part of Tampa. So I said that sounds like it could be fun. So ended up jumping ship at Chili's and going to work for a sister restaurant group. From there, this store was what they called a corporate manager training store. So basically, they would bring managers into that location and train them, and then ship them out to like new locations or new restaurant units that they were doing. So usually there's like 1 to 2 managers at like a corporate restaurant, but this one always had 5 on at a time. So because there was always somebody that was training, and there was always somebody that was being developed and stuff like that.
I'm sure that made it extra fun for the other team members to have so many managers around all the time.
Quite frankly, it was actually a good thing in my opinion, because it showed me about how many different kind of personalities there are in the industry. None of them would act the same. All of them had different managerial styles and skills, and some were better at some things and some were better at other things, and they worked really well as a team. And there was always, it was a rotating cast of managers, because once somebody, they opened like a store in Lake Buena Vista, Florida, like right outside of Disney World, and one of the managers that was training there got shipped down there, so him and his family moved down there. And then about 2 weeks later, here's this other manager, and they're training him and stuff like that. So it was interesting. I got some of my experience working with and talking to these other managers and kind of learning more about what it's like to manage people. And at the time, that was the first time that I had really kind of opened my eyes to what it was like to be a leader. And so it was a good thing for me. Eventually, they asked me if I would get into corporate development. So basically what that meant was they opened a store in there, and they're like, would you travel up there and help us open the store, help with training the new staff? They call it cattle call, where they would hire people off the street.
Right.
And you would do like introductory, like, okay, guys, welcome to Macaroni Grill, and I'm your bar trainer. I'm going to show you guys all about, how to make the drinks and what we're all about from a cultural standpoint, and how we treat our guests and stuff like that. And it was also kind of reminiscent of being back in the van, back on the road, because I would go up and then I would spend about, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks opening this new location, and they would open the doors and we would stick around and we would make sure that everything was running good to the best of our ability. And then it would be like, okay, we'll see you guys later and best of luck. And so it was interesting to me about how to come and develop a staff kind of from nothing, from zero, and get them to a point where they were self-sufficient. And then I would come home and I would work back at my bar, back at my home store in Tampa, and then they'd say, okay, well, we're going to open a new store in Mobile, Alabama. Okay, well, back on the road, So I'd hop in the car, go to that store, get to know the managers, and help them with assisting them with bringing on new staff and open the store. And so then that was my life for about a year.
Yeah. What a great opportunity to have exposure to that many people and that many, like you said, management styles and opportunities. I don't know if you were thinking, well, I'll ask you in a second, but if you were thinking that far down the road of, I'm going to be able to use all this information someday, or if you just kind of thought of it as like, it's just my job right now.
Yeah, I had no idea how it would affect my life in the future and kind of set me up for success in my later career. But at the time, it was fun. It was fun traveling. It was fun just being a part of, still to this day, I love being part of a team. Even though I'm the owner and the operator and the boss, I count myself as a team member. It's like that old meme or that old picture about when it's the guy that's behind the desk and it says, this is a boss, and he's pointing to the guys and they're pulling it, or this is a leader and they're out with the guy pulling the desk. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, I've seen that. Yeah.
So I always like to be, the kind of leader where you get down and into the nitty gritty with the team, because it sets a good example for everybody.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just fun for me. I loved hospitality. I loved being able to travel. I loved being able to develop new team members, and I kind kind of had a knack for it. So I got a lot of accolades and compliments on how well I did. So it kind of kept me motivated. And again, it lasted a good while until I ended up getting a call from my business partner who had just acquired the Lunchbox where we worked in college. And so that's how I ended back up in Tallahassee.
Okay. So we're talking about David Rainey, right? And he was your roommate in college?
So he and I lived in the same dorm together freshman year.
Okay.
We were introduced by a mutual friend. And we ended up having breakfast together in the cafeteria and getting to know each other and just kind of hit it off. The second year of college, we lived in the same apartment together, and then we just maintained our relationship all the way through college. Lived together again senior year, so we were best friends, still best friends to this day. My wife calls him my hetero life mate. So we
kind of a bromance thing.
Definitely
going on.
A bit of a bromance, yeah, for sure. Okay. So when we were in college here, we worked at the Lunchbox, which was called Jenny's Lunchbox.
Right, formerly. On the corner of Magnolia and Mahan.
That's correct. An old gas station converted into a breakfast restaurant.
At some point, a truck or a car went through it.
It sure
right?
did, yeah. It's also probably well known in Tallahassee as the worst parking lot in the southeastern United States. It's
I mean, I don't know if it tops the Trader Joe's parking lot.
That's also pretty bad. But ours
but it is bad.
Ours
the Lunchbox is bad.
Yeah. And when you realize that it was a gas station back in the day, it kind of makes a lot of sense. But Jenny and her husband, Rico, they owned the Lunchbox. But Jenny was actually in school, and she and David were in exercise science classes together. So what had happened was after we graduated, Jenny got into medical school, I think at Nova down in South Florida. So they had to sell the restaurant so that they could move their family down there. So they wanted to sell the business to a former employee. They kind of had it on the market, but it was low key. And so they approached David about buying it. So David ended up borrowing money from his grandfather and purchasing the restaurant. I had been in Tampa now, so we obviously kept in touch,
Yeah.
And so he was like, dude, you'll never believe this, but I just bought the Lunchbox. And I was like, well, how's it going? He's like, man, it's almost like I work here again, but I have to pay all the bills. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, keep in touch and let me know how it goes. By this time, I kind of felt like I was hitting a ceiling with Brinker just because I felt like I was going to learn all that I had learned. I felt like my well of hospitality knowledge was full. And I kind of learned about, just picking and choosing from the things that I was learning from these management teams. I kind of felt like, this is good. I'm going to use this. And this is really good. I'm going to use this. And this kind of isn't my style. I'm not going to do this. Right. And so I kind of learned about where I fit as far as being like a leader of men in the hospitality industry and women. But I was like, well, let me know how it goes. He's like, you could move back to Tallahassee and we could run this thing together, and there's no breakfast. There's a lot of white space, especially at the time, for breakfast in Tallahassee, and we could just come up with our own concept. And that really just intrigued me. I'd been entrepreneurial, so to speak, growing up. I knew in college that I wanted to own my own business. I just didn't know what I wanted it to be at the time. Right. So everything started to kind of click in my head that like, yes, this owning a restaurant seems to make the most sense right now. So I ended up moving back to Tallahassee. And the funny story about it is that it was by moving back to Tallahassee, it was almost like we were back in college again. David had just bought a 3-1 in Myers Park. And he's like, you can just live with me. I'll pay for all the bills, but let's put a business plan together and let's come up with a new concept. Right. So it was very much like being in college again, and so what ended up happening was.
Did you like that at first?
I did. It was kind of like it was
felt comfortable.
It felt comfortable. Yeah. It felt a little kind of weird. Like I thought I had.
I'm a grown man.
I thought I was going to grow, but at the time, especially starting our own business, we were able to save on money. And
you got to live like a college student.
Yeah, you have to. We were basically just roommates all over again. And at the time, he was like, "Yeah, I just bought a house." And I'm like, "You just bought a house? Like, are you kidding me? You're only in your early 20s. This is crazy." But that just is a testament for how well the restaurant did. we looked at the Lunchbox's menu and looked at its operation, and we said, well, I think it would be better if we added this, and this, and I wish we could do this, and this differently, because it was an inherited brand, you know what I mean? There were already things that were in place that the customers don't expect you to change. So you just say, well, how can I do this differently? How can I make this more my style and more of us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we kind of put together a menu and a couple ideas, and then we started looking for space. But before we did that, we had to look for money. So I went to my parents, and again, they are my biggest cheerleaders, my biggest inspiration. And because I was able to go to school at Florida State, and again, I did pretty well in high school, but I was able to come on a scholarship. My parents had told me that, if you go to school for free, then we have your nest egg of your college fund that will, turn over to you, and you can, use it to start your life, essentially. So I went to them and I was like, what would you say if I could have that money and start a restaurant? And any other parent would probably be like, yeah, right, buddy. Like, what are you thinking?
That's like the worst investment you can possibly make.
I can only imagine what most people's parents would say.
Not the worst, the riskiest.
The riskiest, yeah. Not the worst,
not
but
the worst.
Definitely the riskiest.
Yeah, riskiest.
And I kind of was preparing for a no, like, what are you thinking? But they were like, yes, that is actually a really good move. And I was a little shell-shocked, to be honest with you. I was like, say that again for me one more time. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, this is a great move. So it was like, I think we started the first Canopy with $50,000 or something like that. It was in an old Larry's Giant Subs on North Monroe Street. We did most of the renovations ourselves,
right?
Just kind of really bootstrapped it. And then we opened in April of 2007.
And we'll be right back. How I Got Here is sponsored by Barano Heating and Air Conditioning in Tallahassee. I've been friends with Patrick Barano since we met in a chamber leads group about 15 years ago. I'll admit that I pursued him pretty hard to be his marketing firm and eventually won him over. And the reason I wanted to work with him is that I was already a customer, and I knew what kind of company he and his father before him had built. He cares about his customers, he cares about his team, and he cares about this community. I've experienced Barano Heating and Air when they installed a complete system replacement a few years ago, and I enjoy peace of mind and same-day service with my Total Comfort Service Agreement. I've also been behind the scenes at their office and seen firsthand the true character of this company. And that's why we're so proud to represent them. To learn more or to schedule an appointment online anytime, visit baranoac.com. They really always will be there for you. And now back to the show. So where did you get the idea? What was the inspiration for what you wanted Canopy Road Cafe to be?
Well, again, I had done so much traveling when I was younger, and so I got the opportunity to go to different diners and different restaurants in different cities, and just as we were traveling and stuff like that. So I kind of just kept a little notepad and would jot down little ideas. Oh, this is cool. Or, oh man, what if somebody did some of this? I didn't know I was going to be a restaurant owner, but I just being entrepreneurial, I kind of always would have I call it my little idea journal that I would write little notes to myself on. This was way before Notes app on iPhone, which I don't even want to show you my Notes app. I write notes for everything. I can't even imagine how many notes are in my app right now.
Yeah.
But I've always been one of those, if I get inspired by something, I write it down so I can remember it and go back and reference it later and stuff like that. So I'd kind of built up an idea of breakfast ideas that I wanted to do or that hadn't been seen yet. Early on we did crepes on the menu, which I'll never do again, but we had crepes on the menu, and we knew we wanted to have a bunch of different crazy pancake flavors, and we wanted to have really cool omelets, and we wanted to do just some stuff that was, I'd call Lunchbox the Waffle House of our group of brands,
right.
Whereas we wanted to elevate it a little bit more to where Canopy is right now. I've heard it called everything from a gourmet Waffle House to the stoner little brother of First Watch. I've heard all sorts of comparisons to where we are right now as we sit. But
so even if you knew the restaurant business, and which you did, and you had an idea, a concept in your mind, turning an old Larry's sub shop into a breakfast spot, that took some knowledge about equipment, process, flipping a whole business. I mean, the whole actual, physical location. How did you put all that together to be able to make a restaurant work in a location that wasn't built for that?
So a lot of times that is what they call a turnkey location. So if a restaurant is, if a space that you're moving into was formerly another restaurant, that's what they call a turnkey space. So basically the hood ventilation was already in place to where you can cook on a grill or fry anything. It was underneath a ventilation system.
Okay.
That's a big part of the build-out process when you're building restaurants from scratch. It's very costly. If anybody is ever thinking about starting their own restaurant, the first thing they should and they're limited on funds, the first thing they should do is locate, close down, or potentially closing restaurants. That's step one, honestly, and that's what I tell people to this day. If you're thinking of opening a restaurant, do not build it from scratch. Save money and try to move into a closing restaurant.
Okay, that makes sense.
So really, the only other thing that we needed to do was provide what we called FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So we had to clean it up. We had to, paint the walls. We had to put new tables and chairs in. We had to change the fans, add some lighting.
So the guts were good.
Guts were good. Yes,
Okay.
Guts were good. It already had like a dishwasher area in place that already had a grease trap, which is a big part of building out a restaurant because the city will rip you a new one if you don't have that in place. So we pretty much got a layup when it comes to our first restaurant.
Nice. Okay.
And eventually when we opened our second location on Capitol Circle, that was another turnkey restaurant that used to be, ironically, another sandwich shop. And that was our second location was one where we had to put the ventilation system in. So first location was a layup. All we had to do was just bring stuff in the building, turn the lights on, and cook our menu. By that point, we kind of had familiarized ourselves with what a further build out looks like in the sense of installing like a hood ventilation system, bringing on equipment, and kind of actually getting into the walls and actually building the restaurant part. It wasn't until our third location where it was actually a box in a plaza where we built it up from complete scratch.
Okay.
So,
but by then you knew what you were doing.
Correct. Yeah. By that point, we paid for the second store out of cash flow. So we ended up, because we were living together, we were living dirt cheap. We would take turns. I'd be like, "You want to cook or serve today?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I'll cook today." And so I'll be like, "Okay, we'll switch tomorrow." And so we just took turns, kind of serving and cooking. At the time, I didn't have a lot of back-of-house experience. It wasn't until I owned my own restaurant where I started actually being in the back and learning about kitchens and all of my experience and training was in the front of house. So it was kind of ironic, and this was even something that my parents brought up. They're like, "What are you going to do about cooking? You've never cooked professionally before." And I was like, "I'll figure it out. Like I'll get it together." The good news is because it's breakfast and diner food, it's not the most challenging, so to speak, as long as you use good ingredients and
there are staples people expect.
That's right.
The kind of flavors that are pretty traditional.
That's right. Yeah. So it wasn't rocket science by any means, but yeah, it was interesting at the beginning, to say the least. So, but it ended up, it took about a year or so to really catch like any sort of like buzz, to where we were starting to get waits on the weekends, and it got to the point where customers were coming up to us and being like, you guys might want to really consider having a second location just because the first location is so small.
Right. And not great parking. Well, extended, there was tons of parking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Accessible. So that was good.
That was good. But honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because one thing I've noticed, or just throughout my career, is, it's better to have a small place that's busting at the seams than have a place that's too big that only looks half full.
Right.
So I think, probably to the consumer's eye, we looked maybe busier than we were, but it's just because our place was so limited in seating. And so eventually it got to the point where it was very close quarters in there, that's for sure. So,
I'd been there many times, and it was it always was full.
Yeah. It's still a special place to me. It's where we got our start, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when we decided, okay, like, we think there's enough demand and maybe it's time to launch a second location, we kind of knew the first things first. We needed good parking and more space.
Right. So how long was it before you guys sat down, because you borrowed money, it was scary, doing something different, and said, this may actually work?
Yeah, I think probably we monitored our reviews. They always came back, pretty good. We got a lot of great, the best part about Tallahassee is the community, and we had a lot of great word of mouth. And so I think still to this day, word of mouth is one of the best forms of advertising and marketing.
Yeah. Although a professional marketing company is still important.
You are right about that, my
friend.
I'd
throw that in
no,
there.
You are absolutely.
But word of mouth, number one, all the time.
Also, just because when you're so limited on funds and that's really all you have, you know what I mean? So we get our best feedback from our customers still to this day. When we have we have a rotating menu of specials that we put out every quarter, and we put these out, but what we use our customers' feedback to determine whether or not these items are going to stay on the menu or if we should pass on them and try something else and stuff. So we listen to our customers' feedback very seriously. So it eventually got to the point where enough people were telling us, like, you guys have something here, and we started seeing people 2 to 3 times a week. Breakfast places are kind of like daytime bars in the sense of you're serving regulars quite often, you know what I mean, especially in a diner set. So when you start seeing people, multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day, you kind of determine like, okay, we're doing something right.
Having meetings there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it got to the point where that was happening often enough to where we thought, and then obviously there were 2 of us. So we said, well, we've worked together on one, and now there's 2 of us. So running 2 should not be quite as hard.
Right.
A lot of our staff still to this day are some of them are still with us, and we've been in business 18 years. So we've had people that have been with us for the long haul for sure.
Wow.
So turnover has never really been a big issue with us. So we had our employees also were like, you guys should do a second location. I think it would be really good, and we'll help. Like, we'll help you with the build out, and and it was just very
awesome.
very gratifying to hear that kind of response.
You get a buy-in from the other team members.
That's right.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. So they've always been a good group of cheerleaders for us, and we work hard for them too. So
how did you make the decision to start branching out outside of Tallahassee and moving to other parts of Florida?
So at the time we had 4 stores in Tallahassee. We've just opened our 5th one, but that was about a year and a half ago. But we had 4 locations in Tallahassee at the time. A young man who worked for us, his name's Nick Presti, and his brother Zach. Nick worked for us when he was in college here. And he got a job through another girl that worked for us, but he was always kind of hanging on my coattails a little bit, being like, being very inquisitive of the business. And I was like, if you want to learn more about this business, like, come with me. I will show you the way. You know what I mean? So I would take him on meetings. He was kind of like my little intern. He would come on meetings with me. I'd take him to, food shows, trade shows, stuff like that. I would kind of show him the ropes. Then he started talking about how he was going to just drop out of school and he was going to go open a Canopy. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to pull you out of school, to do this, but he was dead set on it. So what ended up happening was we met with their parents. Their parents came up to Tallahassee and we took them out for coffee, and I sat him down almost like I was asking him to get married. I said, okay, these are my intentions with your children. And again, it's similar to my story with my parents. It was similar to the story with my parents, where I was like, Nick's talking about not graduating. That has nothing to do with me. That is not on me. I didn't have anything to do with this. This is him talking. So, but their parents still, I talk to their parents all the time. They're insanely supportive of them and of us and the brand, and they're like, this I think they really like the idea of the 2 of them working together on a project too, which
cool.
I still to this day, everybody that comes up to me, they're like, how did you end up being so successful? And I tell them straight up, point blank, I had a partner. I cannot imagine, I think about, Jerry, who was on your podcast. She went at it alone, you know what I mean? Which gives me the utmost amount of respect for her.
Yeah.
I, again, work better as a member of a team. There are things that I'm good at. There's things that David's good at, and there's things that I hate, and there's things that he hates. And we're very much like a yin-yang relationship. That has allowed us to get where we are. And so I felt that there was a good opportunity for them to work together, very similar to how David and I did. So basically, it was all roses and confetti. We're like, we're going to do this. They say, we want to do it in Orlando. And I said, let's pump the brakes for a minute because we are just a small little family-owned breakfast place and we'll get killed in Orlando. But they're like, well, where should we go? And I said, well, let's look at the Jacksonville market. At the time, I had gone over to Jacksonville quite a bit. For anybody that's listening, I'm covered in tattoos, so my tattoo artist is over there. I know a lot of industry folks over there, a lot of colleagues that have some great restaurants over there, so I visit Jacksonville pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
I was familiar enough with the market to know that, like, well, it's so spread out and there's still these little pockets. You know, Jacksonville's a huge city.
Sure.
So there's still these little pocket communities where, you know, you can come in and make an impact.
Yeah.
And our whole goal from the very beginning, still to this day, is that we want to be confused as the best local place. Like, even though we're technically a chain, we still want to come into a market and be known as like that friendly local place. That's a big part of our culture and what we do. So I said, what do you guys think about Jacksonville? And they said, say less. Like, we'll do it. We'll go there. So they kind of went in, you know, not really knowing a lot about the area. And so we started looking for sites, and we found one in South Jacksonville that was, still to this day, I kind of pinch myself, but it was a former breakfast restaurant. So we came
even
into
more turnkey
even
than the
more
other ends.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can't get any more turnkey than this,
Yeah.
you know. So it was a breakfast restaurant that was owned by this couple that was retiring, and it was on a major highway, on Old St. Augustine Road and Phillips Highway, in what seemed to be a good trade district. We like being around a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
There's a lot of car dealerships around, stuff like that. So I was like, this is a no-brainer, guys. Like, you can get in here. So they ended up getting started for right around the same amount of money that David and I got started with. So they were able to hit the ground running. And what was ironic about everything is, first thing they did is moved in together.
Oh, really?
Yep, that's right. So they ended
That's a
up
pretty strong culture you built there for how to start a location.
and they're brothers, so they
Yeah.
you know, it came naturally to them. But
So if anybody starts, two things: you have to get your parents' permission,
Yep.
and you have to find somebody to live with to cut costs.
yes,
Right.
specifically your partner.
That's right.
If you
your partner, the other person involved.
That's right. Yeah. And again, they were able to pay off their investment in just, I think it was like 18 months or
That's
something
amazing.
like that.
Yeah.
So, and it was exciting for me because that was the first time that I felt this kind of warmth in my heart, because I had mentored somebody who in turn became successful. And so there was something very rewarding about that. And still to this day, you know, I'm involved with a lot of mentor programs. That was kind of the genesis of me wanting to be a mentor to other people, because I never really had like a mentor kind of growing up. You know, I had
Right.
stuff that I had picked up along the way, or stuff that I had learned through my jobs and stuff like that I was just taking mental notes. And but I never really had somebody grab my hand and say, I'm going to show you how to do this. So I like the way it turned out. I like learning on the fly. I like being able to learn for myself, and actions speak louder, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm not envious of it, but I like being able to provide somebody with something that I didn't have growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
So how many locations do you have in total with Canopy Road across the state?
13.
13.
Yeah.
Is that hard to believe when you think about it?
It is. It's I think about it all the time, morning, noon, and night. It's all consuming sometimes.
So you're a corporate guy now.
I guess you could call it that. My problems have changed as my career has grown. My problems used to be at the very beginning just being able to wake up in time to open up and cook the grits and cook the bacon and hoping customers walk in the door. Whereas my problems now are much, much different. Last time I counted, we have something like 188 employees across the state. So your role changes and kind of shifts and morphs as the business continues to grow. But, you know, that's part of the exciting part of it too. You know, You're always learning something different, and there's always multiple hats to wear, that's for sure. And if you're not good at something, then you consider bringing somebody on specifically for handling that kind of stuff.
Right.
You know, we have a director of operations now, Mary, who's been with us pretty much since the brand's been close to infancy, and she's, you know, worked her way up from server to manager to district manager, and now she pretty much is the head honcho. Like, everybody answers to her. She's amazing. She's like everybody's mom. She's super sweet. She's one of the hardest workers I know. She's very inspiring to me, and she is a critical piece of the brand and why we've been so successful. So we've brought in a lot of help along the way to help make the car go.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's talk for a minute about Rise and Grind Hospitality, your umbrella company, because you have other brands and concepts other than Canopy Road Cafe. So just give us an overview of what all is involved there.
So we have 13 canopies. The Lunchbox obviously is still under our control. We opened a little egg sandwich concept on Jacksonville Beach called Egg Boy, which we found the piece of real estate. We really liked it. It was close to the naval base. It was only 1,250 square feet. This was kind of post-pandemic where we said, what if we just did a fast casual version of our menu where it was just limited to breakfast sandwiches of all shapes and sizes and stuff. And so we launched that with our franchisees over in Jacksonville. But it's got a lot of potential to scale. We just don't know what vehicle we're going to use yet, but it's been a big hit, huge hit. It's kind of met and exceeded all of our expectations. And then here in town, we opened Lemon Thyme in Midtown, which is a healthy salad and bowl concept. So those are all of our brands that we own and operate.
Okay. Yeah, no, I know Lemon Thyme, there was a lot of anticipation about that coming in Midtown and offering a kind of a bigger city experience as far as healthy lunch items, kind of salad-based stuff that there wasn't anything like that here. So was that is moving into a little different direction than you have in the past? So what was that decision like to get involved with that?
So post-pandemic, I kind of wanted to lean more into fast casual. It's not that I've had my fill with sit-down service and stuff like that, but I wanted to flex my creative muscle in a different way. I was still to this day kind of floored that there's not a lot of healthy options in town. I find that strange to me, being Tallahassee being as large as it is. But that was a situation where it was post-COVID. The bar another turnkey, the bar had closed down. It was formerly known as Fox and Stag. It was a bar in Midtown. Slayton Murray from Talcor is a good friend of mine and it is now a partner with me. Approached me with this location, and he's like, I get a lot of. I'm very blessed that people come to me when they, want ideas or want advice about something, especially in the hospitality side of things. So he's like, what would you do here? Like, I'm trying to find something that's a good fit. And would you have any ideas for it? And I said, again, on my notepad, I had my little secret salad shop idea that I wanted to bring to fruition. So, and you kind of have to be you always want to be a little hesitant because you don't want anybody to take your idea.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I have this idea and it's a fast casual salad place. There's nothing like it in town. I really think that this layout could, and I started kind of drawing on my pretend whiteboard and I was like, people could come in here and then they could go down the line and they could do this and then they could sit here and then, so on and so forth. And he's like, I love this idea and let's make it happen. So I said, okay, well, just keep me posted. So he went to his sister, Kate, and she had went to Auburn and then she was working in Atlanta doing structured settlements, I believe. And she was living away from her longtime boyfriend who was here in Tallahassee. And so Kate and Slayton started talking about it and Kate's like, well, I'll move back to Tallahassee and I love this idea and I want to do it. So kind of the similarities with the story of Nick and Zach is here's this young woman who's around the same age as they were when they started. And I'm like, all right, come with me. I'm going to show you the way. You know what I mean? And so she ended up moving back to Tallahassee. We put a business plan together. We ended up getting some funding, and then we launched Lemon Thyme. I believe it was in 2021 or 2. And having a female leader, especially in the hospitality industry, where you don't see it's not an occurring thing where there's a lot of female leaders. I thought she was the perfect face to lead this vision. You know what I mean? So she took on the responsibility like a champ. I mean, still to this day, I call her the catering machine. She can knock out 10 caterings a day. She's just that good. And she really had a knack for it. And again, I was getting calls all the time from her, like, what about this? And do you have any ideas about this? And so here I am in this mentor role again. So I kind of, not even necessarily did it purposely, but I always kind of ended up as this kind of mentor position. So I was like, I might as well just embrace it that I'm like the grandfather telling all the kids how to do everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you've talked about your kind of situational mentorship over time, and you seem to be put in that position a lot. and you do it in a more formal way at the Jim Moran College of Entrepreneurship. And you went back and got your master's, right?
That's right.
Then, and continue that relationship and give back and speak there. So talk about that. Why is that important to you to give back in that way?
I got to a level in my career where I felt like I knew enough to where I should almost get an honorary master's degree. You know what I mean? Like the master's degree of hard knocks.
Yeah.
But when the pandemic hit and there was just a lot of unknown. So they were telling, I was a little peeved about how the narrative was going on in the world about how restaurants were going to close and this is it for restaurants. I think, restaurants are part of the fabric of society. Restaurants aren't going anywhere. I think that people were just being, just being overcomplicated and trying to spell doom and gloom. But there was a lot of unknown for me at the time. I was like, is this it? Like, it was fun while it lasted, you know what I mean? And the dean of Jim Moran, Susan Fiorito, she taught me in college and taught my wife in college as well. My wife got a merchandising degree as well. She's like my in-town mom. So I take her out to lunch and we hang out, and she had just became the dean of Jim Moran downtown. And she's like, I'm just going to throw this out there, but you're in such a position to where it would make the most sense if on the back half of your career, I had thought, my mom was a teacher, so I had thought about, what if I got into teaching after I, either sell the business or retire or something like that. And that seemed fun for me. So she's like, well, you can't do it without a master's degree. And so she would always joke about that. And so when after the pandemic hit, she said, they're waiving the GRE entrance exams to get your master's degree. So now would be a pretty perfect time to get it while you have some downtime while this pandemic thing's going on. And I'm like, Susan, you're crazy. Like, what do you think? I'm going to go back to school right now? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And she's like, well, I already filled out your letter of recommendation. So I was like, all right, well, and again, I prayed on it. I talked to my parents. I was like, do you think this is a totally stupid idea? And they're like, no, this is actually, it makes a lot of sense because you can do it all online. There's no in-person classes or anything like that. And quite frankly, at the time when I was in college, I wished that there was a resource like the Jim Moran College of Entrepreneurship when I was coming up. I would have, if it existed the way that it is now back in the day, I would have easily went to school there. It's such an amazing program. I mean, to how they foster entrepreneurship in young adults is just mind-boggling.
Right.
And to be a part of it, I serve on the board, and they let me participate in like these Shark Tank, business launch things, and I just get a kick out of it. It's the best. So I said, okay, Sue, you win. I'm going to get my master's degree. So the ironic part of it was I ended up meeting a lot of other guys that were some a little older than me, some a little younger than me, but a lot of guys that I call colleagues to this day. The CFO of Kessler Collection Hotels, he was getting his master's degree at the time, and so we ended up grouping together for projects and stuff like that. So I made a lot of friends, and then there was obviously the younger adults that were in there getting their master's degree, but it was a fun time. I'm very glad that I did it. It also brought me closer to the program and the school and kind of seeing everything that they do and what they're all about. And so and it allowed me to step back into that mentor role. They would say, okay, well, can you come speak at this class? Can you come talk to this class? And I have kind of like an animated way, the way that I talk. And so it's a lot different than maybe like a typical college professor talks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'll drop an F-bomb every once in a while. And
a little more real world stuff.
Very much so. Yeah. Like I said, school hard knocks, man. Yeah. So, you're not going to learn this in a right. You know what I mean? So this is how it is.
Restaurant language can get a little salty from time to time.
It's salty. Yeah. Right. I'm pretty proud of myself for toning it down as much as I have on this podcast. So I
appreciate it. I don't have to put a rating on it now. So I appreciate it.
Rated M for mature.
Or an explicit warning or something, So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. But it's been fun. It's the one time where like I feel that my services were needed, and I got a lot of great feedback from the people that are in the program.
At some point, I know you had the bromance with David, but at some point you traded him in for what I think you will say was upgrade to your wife, Allison, at some point.
Yes.
So tell us how you met her and how all that happened. What's your story?
So she was a girlfriend of one of our employees at the time. She's younger than me by about 7 years. So she was one of her girlfriends, worked for us, and she would come into the restaurant all the time. And so I'd shoot my shot and I'd be like, hey, is she with anybody? And her friend would be like, I think she has a boyfriend right now. So, and not only did she have a boyfriend at the time, but he was British. So it's
tough to compete
with that accent.
It is. That's rough.
So I shot my shot. Listen, it was out there. So I said, like if things don't work out, just, give me a chance. So eventually they ended up breaking up, and she was still maybe a little unsure, but luckily her sister who was visiting and had come in to eat, she said, oh, just give him a shot. So she was a merchandising major, and she ended up getting a job at Anthropology. Great position right out of college for her. So she used to do the district visual set designers. So she moved to South Florida, and Anthropology always has the coolest store outlooks and stuff, and the way that the stores look and how they place their products around the store, it's always very creative and whimsical.
Yeah.
So she's like, I kind of have to take this job, and I said, okay, well, we can do long distance for a while. So eventually, she ended up getting into fitness heavily. She was a dancer growing up, so she moved back to Tallahassee. We got married, and then she ended up going full steam into being a Pilates instructor. She ended up starting her own brand, much to my constantly getting pressured by me. So she was a little wary of starting her own business, but I'm like, come on, if I can do it, anybody can do it. You know what I mean? So I tried to be her words of encouragement, but.
So how's it worked out?
So it's worked out great. She's very successful, and she has found something that she's passionate about as well. So, but she's my rock. She is the person I come home and cry on her shoulder when I'm having bad days, and the person I celebrate when we have big victories. So I wouldn't trade anything else in the world. She's been my rock for most of my life. So
yeah, that's awesome. All right, so Brad, looking back, what is the one thing or person that has changed or altered the trajectory of your life to this point?
I'd say it's a three-way tie between my parents, my wife, and our unborn daughter that we're about to have in April. So,
okay. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah,
that's a life changer. Talk about all these other things. That's nothing compared to what you're going to be blessed to be dealing with soon.
We're having a child a little bit later in life, so I'm a little more set in my ways. So I'll be interested to see how this is. But we've had a lot of and we have a lot of great love in our family, and a lot of great group of friends that are super supportive of us. But I guess I'm just assuming that that's going to be a pivotal life change for me. So and something that I'm very much looking forward to, because I think, children give our lives more meaning, and it gives me something to work even harder for, to make sure that she has a good life. So, and my parents have been just with me through thick and thin. They've always been supportive of me, and my wife just the same. So I couldn't have done anything without any of them.
Yeah. So final question, the podcast is called How I Got Here, and we've talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in 3 to 5 years?
It's a good question. I think probably we've started to have some talks with some private equity firms that are interested in kind of what the next phase of growth looks like for the brand. So I could see myself, maybe taking a little bit more of a back seat and having somebody else steer the ship for a little bit. I would like to, eventually, obtain more capital to be able to fund this next phase of growth, and do it with some partners that are well versed in how to scale and grow a restaurant brand. And then obviously, I'll have a little one on the way. So I foresee me, kind of putting some of the work stuff aside and being able to focus on my family and what my offspring will bring to my life.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, Follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com.